de hacer clic en Done. No se olviden de hacer clic en Done o Listo cuando terminen de escoger el idioma y les recomendamos que cierren el audio de la habitación principal en inglés para escuchar la reunión solamente en español. Gracias. Back to you.
All right, good morning. We're going to call this meeting to order at 9 a.m. Madam Secretary, can you call the roll?
Yes. Committee Member McDonald? Here. Chair Okrepke?
Here.
And Committee Member Fleming is absent by prior arrangement.
Thank you very much. We have no remote participation. Any announcements? Seeing none, we'll move on to approval of minutes. Do you have anything to say about the minutes? All right, neither do I. We will adopt those minutes as submitted. We'll go to item 5, public comment on non-agenda items. This is anybody's opportunity to talk about anything under the purview of the Public Safety Subcommittee that is not agendized. Seeing nobody moving at all, we will close public comment on non-agenda items and we'll move on to new business. Item 6.1, Measure H Implementation Plan. Chief Westrup, take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair Okrepke and Councilmember McDonald. Scott Westrup, Fire Chief of the City of Santa Rosa. Today, I just have a brief update on where we're at with implementation of Measure H. Am I presenting? Thank you. So I've shown you this slide before and we've been through it. There's just some background on what Measure H is and how it was passed. What I will brief you on that's new information is that to date, with the 3 tax rolls we've received, the City of Santa Rosa has received $6.642 million in sales tax revenue directly to the fire department through Measure H. So we're seeing what we predicted to be for a total of the sales tax measure to be around $60 million countywide. And then our 14.4% roll of that, we're seeing that right on target. So things are moving along exactly as we had predicted. On this slide, I've shown you this before. This was the leader's intent for the team to put together the Measure H implementation plan. Working with finance and working with the city manager's office, they did a fantastic job putting together a plan that essentially what I would label it as, it's aggressive to get resources on the street, but it's also cautious and insulated to make sure that it's financially stable and that Measure H remains financially insulated from any other of the other funding streams that we have. So the really good news is that we're moving along very well. We've actually, with the 2 fire inspectors, we've moved 2 of our limited term fire inspectors that were grant funded positions. We moved them to FTEs under Measure H. So we retained those employees, and then Fire Marshal Lowenthal's team has gone through and done interviews for backfilling the limited term positions that are grant funded, that are will be funded for the next couple of years. So we have some good candidates for that, and we're moving forward on backfilling those positions. So we've increased our capacity in the Fire Prevention Bureau by about 25%. The other news is we were able to place Engine 9 in service on October 6th, along with Battalion 2. This is really a catalyst moment for the city of Santa Rosa in that some of the media was a little misleading. It wasn't a new fire engine. It wasn't a physical piece of apparatus. It was an engine company that went into service. And so Engine 9 has been on the docket, as you know, since 1998. We've had property for Station 9 since 1998 and just never been able to get it across the finish line. So we now have an Engine 9. So instead of 10 engines on the road every day, we now have 11 engines on the road every day. So we've really increased our capacity there. And then Battalion 2, typically we only had 1 on-duty supervisor 24 hours a day. Now we have 2. And while they do split the call volume and they do help each other out on larger scale emergencies, and it doubles our capacity on a day-to-day basis, where the really big impact is instead of having a 14-to-1 span of control or a 15-to-1 span of control, they now have a 7-to-1 span of control. So the training, the district familiarization, the succession planning, the crew interaction, the rumor control is really amplified by getting that second manager on duty on a day-to-day basis. So, and then we still have plans for a heavy rescue to go in service. We're kind of slow rolling this from the standpoint of we need to make sure that our expenditures that we predicted and our revenues that we predicted are solid over the course of a year, and then see what the general fund looks like in the next fiscal year. So we're kind of letting it play out and see how it goes before we jump too far headstrong into staffing up the rescue. But that still is part of the plan, the financial plan that we have set for Measure H, but more to come on that. Next steps, we have a working group that's been formed, and they're putting together all of the changes that would be necessary for us to put a staffed heavy rescue into service in the city. It's something that's never been done before. It'll be an operational area resource. So we have a team putting together that development strategy. And then we're working on identifying locations with the real estate team and TPW for a temporary and permanent Station 9. This slide is not to make any promises that we can't deliver on. This is just for a general sense of where we're looking. As you know, the council has approved selling the Franz Kafka property for Station 9 that we've had since 1998. And we have money to build a fire Station 9 through Measure H. So we're looking in the area of Santa Rosa Avenue and Elsa, Court Street, somewhere in that area. My preference is to find an existing commercial building and retrofit it into a fire station, because the time and the cost would be significantly reduced versus breaking ground. So we're looking in that area. These are some of the properties that we're currently exploring concurrently at the same time. Concurrently means the same time, but sorry, not quite enough coffee yet. But so we're kind of going down two tracks at the same time with the real estate team, and everybody's really working together on trying to find a place to put a permanent Station 9, and in the meantime, where we could potentially put Engine 9 on a temporary basis, because they're currently running out of Station 1, and we'd like to get them into their service area of District 9 further down the avenue. We're developing the first report for the Measure H Citizens Oversight Committee. We had our first meeting, which Chair Okrepke is part of through the Mayors and Council Members Association. So it's a much bigger committee than what we see with PSAP. But we had our first introductory meeting, and now every meeting from here on out will be Brown acted, and we're preparing our first report for that. And then we're developing new systems to closely monitor the revenue and expenditures of Measure H and the personnel in and out of Measure H to make sure that we're really crossing our T's and dotting our I's with all the financial reports that go into this to make sure that it is insulated from the general fund. And with that, that's the update. And I'll take any questions or comments that you have.
Any questions?
Thank you for the update, Chief, and I appreciate the taxpayers, adding this measure. You can see how it enhances our deliverables for public safety. One of the questions I have is how flexible is this budget? So if we were to say have lots of overtime that wouldn't have been scheduled, could you use some of Measure H to backfill that as opposed to taking it out of general fund?
The short answer is no, it's not very flexible. It's set up much like, well, exactly like PSAP, in that it's to enhance, not supplant. So there's a maintenance of effort that we have to achieve. Comparing the general fund expenditures from fiscal year 21 to Measure H. And so we have to prove that maintenance of effort, that we're not supplanting the general fund. So Measure H has its own, essentially, the way we've developed it is it's its own little fire department. So its expenditures and its financial plan is laid out exactly like you see in the general fund, except it's its own fund. And so it has its own overtime line. It has its own operational expenses, service and supplies, and obviously the personnel costs. So we can't necessarily rob Peter to pay Paul. They live insulated in and of themselves. And we built a financial plan at the direction of the city manager to make sure that Measure H is solvent for 10 years on its own, so it doesn't impact the general fund. And conversely, we can't pull money from the general fund to offset expenses in Measure H. So it's a very
fire department was to go like this one that is insulated. If they were to do overtime, that would get billed to Measure H?
correct.
Okay.
It has its own overtime line. There's a budget of $600,000 per year in the Measure H budget. So we have it set up to where if the Measure H employee works overtime in the general fund, it gets charged to the general fund. If somebody works overtime in Measure H, it charges Measure H. And so that's where this accounting really comes into play, is to make sure that people are charging to the right codes based on where their home payroll code is.
Thank you.
Just two questions for me. First, sticking with the numbers, when do you think we will have the first set of revised, reviewed numbers for what the actual revenue from the sales tax measure is?
So we're coming up on the first year in March. I would say in March, once we see a year of revenue, and then that gives us about 6 months of expenditures, we'll have a pretty good sense of where we're at. So I would say by the close of the fiscal year, we'll have a really solid idea of what we're looking at as far as revenues and expenditures go. So we can certainly bring something back at the next Public Safety Subcommittee meeting. That's a point time count, essentially look at the budget where we're at with it. But I would say we're kind of like using this year benchmark as the point to say, okay, now we have a year of revenue, we have a year, not quite a year of expenditures, and we'll have a pretty good sense of how we're looking. But right now we're working with CFO Wagner on all of those reporting mechanisms and just tracking on not a daily basis, but on a monthly basis at least, where we're at, and we're hitting the mark right on every time. So right now we're looking very good as far as meeting the financial plan of Measure H.
Okay. And then my final question is, when looking at Station 9, how are we considering the location with the relocation of Station 8 as well as the construction of the Hearn overpass and the proposed annexation of South Santa Rosa Avenue? It seems as though the places that you have marked out here, and I know you said this is not a promise, don't hold you to it, but it seems as though should Station 8 open on Hearn, these would be fairly close together or easy for 8 to get to where these are versus if it was further down the avenue.
So it's a great question. And actually what it's tied to is everything with Measure H has to be tied to some sort of deployment analysis. So we're fortunate enough to have our own as a city, whereas smaller agencies throughout the county had to use an International Association of Firefighters deployment analysis. But if you look at our current deployment analysis, what it shows is that it's an addendum at the very last page. If Station 8 gets moved to where it is going at Hearn and Dutton, and the Hearn overcross goes in and is improved as it is, so those two pieces are happening, then Station 9 gets moved from where it was on Franz Kafka further down the avenue, and it takes into account potential annexation. So in our estimation, through a data-driven analysis, it is going in the correct location for all of those factors. So it'll improve service down the avenue, even with annexation, if it occurs. It improves service to the South Park area, which is really its first due area that we need to improve service times on in the Costco area, and to Taylor Mountain. So all those factors come into play, but we do have data-driven analysis to back up where it's going.
Okay, great. Thank you. Those are all of my questions. With that, we will move to public comment on this item. Is there any public comment on this item? Seeing none, we will bring it back for final comments. Any final comments? None from me. Thank you very much, Chief. Really appreciate it. With that, we will move on to item 6.2, the Wildland Urban Interface Area Mapping. Fire Marshal Lowenthal, please.
Good morning, Councilmember Okrepke and McDonald. My name is Paul Lowenthal, Fire Marshal with the Fire Department, here to bring forward what we kind of teased during our council meeting earlier this month regarding code adoption. There was questions that surfaced around insurance as well as around our wildland urban interface. And the purpose of today's item is to, again, tease some of the changes that we are proposing, catch you up on changes that have occurred to our mapping for both the state's high fire and severity zones, our existing wildland urban interface, and kind of the history of where we're at today and where we've come from. So as you know, after the CWPP, the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, was adopted about a week and a half before the Glass Fire, One of the objectives of the plan was to identify any potential changes to the wildland interface, but it was specific to Coffee Park. We did an analysis of Coffee Park, weighed a lot of the concerns that we had heard from individuals like Councilmember McDonald with insurance rates and whatnot, and it just did not meet the intention of what the true definition of wildland urban interface should be, even given the history of what had occurred in that neighborhood. So there was a decision that was made back then to not move Coffee Park into the wildland urban interface, and we kept the boundaries as they were, also knowing that at some point in time, CAL FIRE would be making recommendations in and around the city. And our goal would be to use that information to also make potential further changes to the community. So in December of 2022, CAL FIRE did release what they refer to as their state responsibility area maps for their high, very high, and moderate risk areas immediately around the city. Our goal was to kind of monitor what was happening on the outside of the city, because we knew there was the potential that that would affect how the city would become mapped. You can obviously assume that if you've got red or very high immediately adjacent to the city, even though we weren't seeing the city's maps for quite some time, that there was likely going to be some red immediately in the city. Or where we had the very high previously and we don't have it, we knew that we'd potentially be going down in severity. That being said, we brought our maps as required by law for these state responsibility areas to you guys. But that was after they were initially released to us in February of 2025. And were ultimately adopted earlier this year in March of and April of 2028 were the first and second readings. So just to kind of recap where we are today. So these are the current wildland urban interfaces that we've become very familiar with, that have been with us in the city since 2009. We primarily refer to them as the Fountain Grove area, the Bennett Valley area, the Skyhawk area, and then Oakmont. And Oakmont has historically also taken into account the little piece of land on the county campus just north of Los Gilicos. So this is what we first saw in 2022. We had our old SRA state responsibility maps outside the city in your top left corner. And you can see how previously the red kind of touched and hugged into the Skyhawk area. And also dropped down towards Oakmont. And for the most part, the rest of the city stayed at a relatively low risk for quite some time. Then in the bottom right-hand corner, you saw our first glimpse of the changes that were coming to the city. We saw Fountain Grove, immediately north of Fountain Grove, move into more of the moderate. But then we saw the area directly kind of along the old Redwood Highway near the Kaiser campus, stay at the low risk area, which in a roundabout way kind of helped us with our thought process on any potential changes to Coffee Park that we did not previously make when we brought those recommendations forward several years ago. But a couple surprises kind of popped up. We saw the areas near Taylor Mountain, Kiwanis Springs Road around the fairgrounds go from a lower risk to a to a high risk. And then we saw our Bennett Valley area get very high, where it was previously moderate. And then we saw Oakmont kind of get some lower risk immediately adjacent to the city limits. So it transitioned from a moderate in the park to, you can see the yellow, which dropped it down out of high and very high down to moderate. And we still saw a lot of the quote unquote red pushing further towards Highway 12. So previously, the only high risk areas that we had identified in the city by CAL FIRE that required by state law certain requirements to be in effect was a small little island in the middle of Fountain Grove, the area up and around Skyhawk, the Pythian campus, and then we saw from a very high standpoint, kind of the southern end of Oakmont. When the maps got released to us, finally, after a couple years of waiting, our suspicions were confirmed. And we saw our Fountain Grove area primarily remain the same, but we saw some drastic changes around the fairgrounds, pushing pretty deep into what we refer to as our Bennett Valley district, or District 4, around Montgomery High School, Creekside, a lot of those neighborhoods, as well as it kept a lot of parts of Annandale Heights and Bennett Valley Heights very high. But then we saw other parts of our existing wildland interface completely come out of any mapped risk by the state, both in the Rincon Valley area as well as the Bennett Valley area. We also saw the Stonebridge area and Oakmont go to very high, and we saw the state mapped areas. Now, again, these are areas that were required by law to enforce state codes, spill over well into Oakmont on the north side of Oakmont Drive. So in between Oakmont Drive and Highway 12, which is an area that had never previously been mapped as a wildland urban interface area. And then we saw the risk associated with the hillside of Oakmont, the White Oak, the areas essentially in between Oakmont Drive and Annandale State Park, reduce in risk in some areas. And that's been kind of an interesting conversation that we've had with our residents in the Oakmont area over the years, is they've historically seen Annandale as a threat to their community. And we've explained to them that really, when you look at the high-risk fire danger days, we're typically faced with the north wind, those dry winds that come out of the north-northeast. And we've always explained that really Annandale is more of at a risk from Oakmont pushing into Annandale. The typical wind flow that we receive here in Sonoma County and Santa Rosa is that southerly winds that come off the coast, kind of push the afternoon breeze with the higher humidity. And that's where the risk really is to Annandale to Oakmont, when we would have that southern wind potentially pushing something out of Bennett Valley up into Annandale and into Oakmont. But those are typically short duration, short-lived events, and are typical to what we see around here in Santa Rosa, where you get a couple hours of afternoon breeze and then it pretty much dies off. A lot of that was kind of confirmed with the new modeling that we saw here. But that being said, we had to still make some recommendations and kind of figure out how to take what CAL FIRE is giving us. And again, knowing that we have areas that are now in high and very high and have to have rules applied to them that would be the same rules that we'd be applying in our own wildland interface, and then come forward with recommendations on how to redraw our current wildland urban interface maps, and potentially, although we've always looked at how we're going to expand our wildland urban interface, look at opportunities at contracting it, where there's no, in our opinion, reason to keep a community or a portion of our community in those areas, especially given the concerns that we've heard from council, as well as our community with insurance and just being mapped in an area that may not actually need to be mapped in that specific area. So that being said, finally, this is a difficult conversation to have, and trying to keep it in a couple slides when obviously we bring these recommendations forward to our community meeting, as well as back to council with a formal recommendation. We'll have a lot more detail and a lot more explanation. But what you're kind of seeing here is a combination of single hatches in green, in red, and then cross hatches. So cross hatches is where we recommend that we keep the wildland interface as it is. The single green hatching, which is what you're primarily seeing in South Santa Rosa, Southeast Santa Rosa, around the fairgrounds, as well as around, from Montgomery High School, kind of pushing into Creekside and out towards Wood Lake, near the Bennett Valley Golf Course, would all go into our new wildland urban interface. With some of our own local rules. And again, these are areas that are already going to have to now require by law to comply with state responsibility requirements for wildland urban interface areas. We're recommending that we expand it in Oakmont, keep Oakmont as it is on the Annandale side of Stonebridge, Highway 12 and Oakmont Drive, but expand it kind of along White Oak Drive out to Highway 12 include the entire campus of the county. We're recommending looking at pulling it back in the areas that you can see that would be to the northeast of Calistoga Road and Highway 12, the Safeway Calistoga Shopping Center, as well as the neighborhoods immediately around it. We're looking at expanding it off of Calistoga Road to the west of it. You can see it up in there, as well as, actually, that's it. So a lot of changes, a lot to kind of unfold here, but again, wanted to at least give you a snapshot of where we're at as a department and the recommendations that we're prepared to make. And again, relay to our community based on recommendations from CAL FIRE, our own personal history here, as well as some of the feedback we've gotten from council. So with that, I'll take any questions.
All right. Thank you very much. Council, go ahead.
Thank you. Just a couple questions, and I'm not sure if this falls with you, Fire Marshal, or if it's something that goes to the permit department, but I know there's some new changes in legislation around CEQA and what builders need to do so we can really meet the requirements of affordable housing and building in our area. But when we have these new maps in the WUI, does that then trigger that those requirements need to be made to make sure that there's more safety in place? Or do you have any idea if there's a caveat that still allows building to move forward? I know there's one area specifically in my district that looks like it's going to be in one of your WUI maps, but I'm not sure how that works. And I think that's the concern from residents over on the east side of town, is that there's some type of waiver that the state has put in place when it comes to CEQA or future building.
So thank you for the question. I'm not aware of anything that based on the maps would allow them to waive CEQA. And in fact, with some of the requirements in place now, there's more CEQA requirements specifically around evacuation, like we know, and other elements. We have looked at locally, we've had conversations about whether or not we as a city want to make recommendations that may limit types of construction in the wildland interface. We have that as an item in the general plan to explore that, but we haven't physically adopted anything that would limit it at a city level. A majority of what you're seeing with the maps really revolves around code requirements, primarily for building, to your point, but also some of our local ordinances. So again, for areas that are now going to be in our wildland interface, a majority of them are areas that are already in the state's high and very high risk areas. And those will have to comply with state law regardless of what we do with our own wildland urban interface. The areas that we're making recommendations to reduce our wildland urban interface, our own local mapped areas, which would be above and beyond the state's areas, would primarily affect whether or not they're going to build to wildland urban interface standards through the fire code and building code, and comply with some of our local ordinances that we've recently adopted that involve defensible space, what type of landscape mulch, things like that.
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. I don't have any questions, so we will move to public comment on this item. If there's anybody who would like to speak on this item, please move towards one of the microphones now. Nobody is moving, so we will end public comment and come back to the dais. Any final comments, Councilmember McDonald? For me, I'm good with your recommendations for the local WUI, and I appreciate this presentation. One thing I do want to caution is that when we do talk about the WUI, to not make any promises or assertions about insurance. Legally, insurance carriers are not allowed to use these kinds of maps. Specifically, they probably won't use a local map, the CAL FIRE fire severity maps. They're not allowed to use those by law. I'm not saying that prevents them from using them, but they're not supposed to. But there's other things that go into insurance availability that other than just these maps. So with that caveat, thank you very much for this. I appreciate that the presentation, and we will move on to item 6.3, addressing bike e-bike concerns? Chief Cregan and Captain Marinzik.
Okay. Good morning, council members, committee members. Dan Morensic, I'm a captain with the Santa Rosa Police Department. I'm here just to provide a brief presentation related to e-bikes, some of the things that we're seeing in Santa Rosa, as well as some recent legal law changes regarding them. So first, real quickly, just kind of a definition of what e-bikes are, because there's a little bit of a misunderstanding, I think, in the community and throughout. So they basically are bicycles, and they have a battery-powered electric motor that provides assistance. I'm going to kind of detail in some later slides some of the different classifications of e-bikes, and then if they don't meet those classifications, they're not actually an e-bike. I also put in here a caveat that electric scooters and electric motorcycles are not e-bikes, and I'll explain a little bit the differences with them. And again, there's several different classifications of e-bikes, and really they're based on capabilities such as how fast they can travel, and some other requirements of how powerful their engines are. Again, if they don't meet the classification of an e-bike, they're considered a motorized bicycle and a license is required. So I think that's one of the things that we kind of often are seeing in our communities, that there's a lot of people on what people think are e-bikes, but they're not actually e-bikes, they're motorized bicycles, and they're required to have a motorcycle endorsement if people are going to ride them. Again, just a couple slides to show electric scooters. They are not e-bikes. So in order to operate an electric scooter on a roadway, you are required to have a driver's license. If you do not have a driver's license, you are not supposed to be operating an electric scooter on the roadway. And to the right, you'll see a motorized or an electric motorcycle. And I think you can see one of the differences between these and e-bikes is there's no operable pedals on it. So that is classified as an electric motorcycle, and you are required to have a motorcycle endorsement as well as a valid driver's license to operate one of these. So there's been some recent legal changes in the law regarding e-bikes, and really what it's done is it's broken e-bikes down into classifications. So if you take a look at this slide, there's a class 1, a class 2, and a class 3 e-bike. And in order to be considered an e-bike, you need to be able to fit into one of these classes. If you have an electric bicycle, but it doesn't fit in one of these classes, it's not actually an electric bicycle. Again, it's an electric motorcycle, and you're required to have a valid driver's license and a motorcycle endorsement. So I'm just going to touch really briefly on some of these classifications. You can see class 1 e-bike, and it's not required to have a throttle. So on the handlebars, there's nothing to actually adjust how fast you can go. You need to be able to operate that using the pedals, and the electric motor will assist you as you're pedaling, but you still need to be able to operate it. There's no age requirement. Anybody can operate one of these. However, if you're under the age of 18, you're required to have a helmet. And the maximum speed these can go is 20 miles an hour. So if you have an e-bike and it assists you past 25 miles or 20 miles an hour, it's not actually a class 1 e-bike. And then if you look to the right, there's a class 2. And really the only difference between what a class 2 and a class 1 e-bike is that a class 2 has an electric throttle on it. So it actually allows the rider of the bike to use that throttle on the handlebar to adjust how fast they're going. And it doesn't entirely need to be operated by pedal power. And lastly, to the right, a class 3 e-bike. A lot of the same things. There's no throttle. However, it can reach up to a speed of 28 miles per hour. And these, you are required to be 16 years of age to operate these. So if you see a minor, somebody under the age of 16 who's operating one of these bikes, they are not legally allowed to do so. So that was just a real quick rundown of the different e-bike classifications. One of the things I wanted to highlight is because I think over the last couple of years, we've definitely seen a proliferation of e-bikes in our community. And I think as a result, we've definitely seen an increase of incidents that we've had in our community. So over here's a slide of the last couple of years. I'm just showing e-bike incidents that we've had. These are just incidents where, whether it's e-bikes driving recklessly, not following traffic laws, shows the incidents that we've had in our community, and that blue bar graph underneath shows the actual collisions we have that involve an e-bike on a bicycle. So we can see over the last 3 years that we've definitely had a pretty steady increase, starting with we had 33 e-bike incidents in 2023 to we had 80 so far this year in 2025, with several months still remaining in the year. So we're definitely seeing an increase of these incidents in our community. And I put a little caveat in here that many of the complaints involve juveniles and are in the area of school campuses and parks. So one of the things we specifically seen with e-bikes is a lot of complaints of juveniles, specifically juveniles under the age of 16, oftentimes middle schoolers that are riding these bikes and riding them unsafely. We've definitely seen an increase of complaints specifically in and around the middle schools regarding these. And so some of the things that we're doing, right? So I've talked a little bit briefly about what the different types of e-bikes are, how we've seen an increase of these in our community, along with some of the complaints associated with them. I think one of the things to note is that e-bikes are still relatively new. So there's been a lot of legal and law changes at the state level, even recently. I'll go and talk about a couple of them in a follow-up slide. So part of it is making sure that we're up to date internally with some of the new laws and regulations surrounding e-bikes. So what we've done is we provided internal training, we provided internal bulletins to our officers to make them aware of some of these recent changes and what some of these legal requirements are, as well as some detailed information on the classes of e-bikes and when somebody would be riding in and out of class of the proper e-bike. Public. So I've talked about how we've trained people internally. I think one of the things we've seen too is a lack of understanding of what actually e-bikes are, and even those classes that I talked about. So we've provided media releases and an educational campaign trying to educate parents and their children about what e-bikes you should be riding, what are legal to do on e-bikes, what are not legal to do on e-bikes. You know, again, I think one of the things we see of e-bikes provide a lot of convenience, right? It allows people to travel at a speed they wouldn't normally be able to. But I think there's also, with the good intentions, there's a lack of understanding within our community of when kids are legally allowed to ride e-bikes or when they're not allowed to ride e-bikes. School partnerships. So one of the things I've talked about, we've seen a lot of complaints specifically around kids. We've seen a lot of complaints in and around school areas. So we partner with schools. We've had officers, sergeants provide educational material, educational resources, talking with school administrators as well as teachers, educating them on e-bikes and what kids are allowed and not allowed to ride and how they're allowed to ride in and around campus and on city streets. And then the last thing is enforcement. Like I said, a lot of these issues we're seeing with kids under 18. So we always try to start with the educational piece first, because I think there's a big, again, lack of understanding about what people are allowed to do on e-bikes, what they're not allowed to do on e-bikes. So we definitely started with education. One of the things, in addition to education, we've looked at is having these dedicated enforcement days or education days where we've had our motor officers, our traffic teams going out there, looking at high profile areas where we're seeing a lot of these e-bikes incidents occurring, such as in and around schools. And then they're making traffic stops and trying to educate them on what they're legally allowed and what they're legally not allowed to do. On this slide, additional options. So I think we've seen a lot of changes at e-bike law over the course of even the last year. And we see different communities, both here within Sonoma County and outside Sonoma County, putting additional restrictions on e-bikes and e-bike usage. So I just highlighted some of the things that other counties or other cities have done, such as additional age restrictions, additional helmet restrictions, additional prohibited locations, such as riding on sidewalks and parks, on bike paths, things such as that, speed limits. And I included a couple examples here, such as Marin County and San Diego. So oftentimes, we've received a lot of information that Marin County has specific e-bike laws that we don't see in Sonoma County. And that's because Marin County is part of a state pilot program that allows them to put these additional restrictions, such as age limits, helmet restrictions on e-bikes that exceed what is actually allowed by state law, because they have a specific carve out in state law that allows them to test this pilot program. But that is something we still have options we can look at here in the community of different or additional restrictions that we want to provide. One of the things to note with e-bikes is just because it's an e-bike, you still need to obey all the rules that a normal bicyclist would on the road. So you have to obey those rules as a bicyclist, and you have to follow the specific rules of riding an e-bike. So some of the things that a lot of cities have looked at in the past is restrictions on where you can ride, such as sidewalks. Here in Santa Rosa, we actually have a prohibition of riding sidewalks in the downtown area and the Railroad Square area. So that also extends to e-bikes as well. There's some issues, I think, with signage possibly needing to be updated with that to make people aware that they're not allowed to ride bicycles in the downtown corridor. But that is a restriction that e-bikes are required to meet along with bicyclists. And I put down here just to kind of talk about really how this is evolving so quickly, both at the local and at the state level, AB 875. So this is a law that actually just got passed October of this year. So October 1st of this year, this was signed by the governor, and this is an e-bike impound law. So what we see is, even in our community, anecdotally, I can say we see a lot of these kids riding on bikes that are not within the class of e-bike they are allowed to ride, or they're not even an e-bike. So most of the time, these bikes are exceeding the 28 miles per hour. They're a motorized bicycle, not meeting the e-bike standards. This new law allows us or gives us the authority to impound those bikes. So if we see somebody under the age of 16 or somebody who's riding an e-bike out of class, we are actually allowed to take that bike and impound it for a minimum period of 48 hours before we return it to them. So this is definitely a new law. I think that because all the statewide issues and local communities seeing these issues, that was signed recently to help address some of these issues that are being seen. And just on our ongoing commitment, what we're committed to do at the Santa Rosa Police Department is work collaboratively with our partners, our government organizations, city schools, really focus on making sure people are educated about legally what they're allowed to do on an e-bike and whether they can ride an e-bike or not. And then with that education comes that enforcement piece. If people are choosing to disregard, then we'll look at other ways of how we can enforce that in order to make sure people are riding e-bikes safely in our community. And we'll continue to evaluate the resources we have, looking at focused operations as to how we can address some of these issues that pop up. And again, I really want to focus the education piece because I think there's definitely a lack of understanding or a lack of knowledge about what constitutes an e-bike and whether somebody can legally ride an e-bike or not. And that is it. Any questions that I can help answer?
Thank you very much, Captain. Questions?
Thank you for the presentation. On the citations, do those go to the kids or are they for parents to pay?
They do. They go to the kids. However, with juvenile traffic court, kids are often required to appear there with their parents, and then it's addressed more on a rehabilitative model as opposed to necessarily just a punitive fine model.
Great. And I see that you're coordinating with Santa Rosa City Schools, but have we reached out to the other surrounding districts that are still within Santa Rosa?
We've had conversations with them, but we're still in the process of working collaboratively with them and providing some educational materials to them.
Great. And I know we could also maybe add this to the violence prevention program. There's a lot of folks in that particular realm that work with youth. And so we might be able to help get them information about what's required or not required based on age. I do like the thought of allowing kids to have e-bikes. I think it's more convenient depending on where they live. If there's hills and things that they have to go over, I'm sure that having an e-bike makes it easier for them. So I like that we're going out and educating them on what they need to have and what they don't need to have. So just so I'm clear, on the class 1, they don't need to have a driver's license. They don't need to have any any type of permit like that, they could just have to go under 20 miles per hour and have to have a pedal.
Exactly. No e-bikes actually require you to have a driver's license, but the class 3 e-bike that goes up to 28 miles per hour requires you to be over the age of 16 to operate.
Oh, okay, but none of them have to have a driver's license or a
Not-
permit.
Not for an e-bike.
Okay.
For other things such as for a motorized
Motorcycle.
bicycle,
Okay.
electric motorcycle, or an electric scooter, yes.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks
You're
for the
welcome. Thank you.
presentation.
A couple questions for me, Captain. Are the classes listed when purchased? So like when you buy something, does it say this is class 1, 2, 3, or is that something for you to determine yourself?
Yes, it's a good question. What I talked about, a lot of recent legislation that's come out recently, that actually was a recent law, I think, that was passed within the last year. So every e-bike should actually have a label affixed to it that says what the specifications are, as well as identifying whether it's a class 1, a class 2, or a class 3 e-bike.
Thank you. I'm going to take a shot in the dark here. This is probably something you don't know, but do you know let's say like a 14-year-old, like what speed can they get up to on a traditional bike? Can they get up to 28 miles an hour or 20 miles an hour?
They can, I think, depending how good a shape they're in.
Going
But,
downhill.
yeah,
Eris is saying if they're going downhill, yes.
definitely going downhill. I mean, obviously it depends on the bikes, but you can have a road bike and achieve, going 50 miles per hour going down the hill on a road bike. So it really depends on the bike and obviously the capability of the rider, but it's definitely possible.
All right. So without gravity assistance, it's very unlikely they would be able to reach 28 miles an hour as a 14-year-old. During public comment, maybe somebody can address that who's more familiar with bikes. Let's see. You know what? I'm going to take the opportunity because he's here. TPW Director Dan Hennessy walked in. I'm going to ask, were e-bikes and electric motorcycles considered during the adoption of the active transportation plan?
Thank you for the question, council member. Yes, very specifically, they're noted as an important part of our mode shift goals in terms of growing the pie, in terms of who's biking, both ends of the spectrum, kids and senior citizens.
Okay, so I would say in concert between your department and the captain's department, this is a great idea for shifting transportation methods, but within reason.
Yeah, there are a number of concerns that we have about designing for, in particular, class 3 e-bikes. 28 miles an hour is not something that we have typically designed for with respect to narrow spaces and turns related to people on bicycles, and that is shifting our design standards based on the proliferation of those vehicles.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Any further questions? All right, we will move on to public comment. We will start with Eris and then Chris.
To 3 minutes. Am I on now? There we go. Okay. Eris Weaver, Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition. For the last 7 years, a Class 1 e-bike has been my main vehicle, and I put 18,000 miles on it. And the Bike Coalition does do, we have a curriculum that we're developing and have developed for middle school kids, and we have one for adults. We've worked with Sonoma Clean Power's e-bike program, and it's e-bikes have just been such a game changer in getting so many more people on bikes, but we do see and experience the problems with misuse. A couple things I wanted to add to what was on that slide. Another thing in the vehicle code about e-bikes is the motor cannot be more than 750 watts. And I do see things being sold that have pedals that are higher power and higher speed. And the stickers are really hard to see. It is really hard to tell when a bike is an e-bike. I mean, you can see if it's an e-bike or it's one of those, we're calling it an e-bike, but it doesn't really fit those classifications. But yeah, if somebody's going 28 miles an hour on flat, and especially if they're not pedaling, that's not an e-bike. So cite them, please. Two things that I want to talk about. One is about how we talk about the whole thing. These other kinds of vehicles or that have two wheels and pedals but don't fit the standards. Too often I see in the media and in press releases from various law enforcement agencies is referring to them as e-bikes when they're not, and that's such a challenge. So the more that we can all say, no, that wasn't an e-bike, that was an e-motorcycle or a moped, the better it is, because it sort of taints the whole e-bike thing. The other is, what do we do about it and at what level? I think those of us in the bike advocacy world are in agreement that the state regulations aren't quite doing it. It was probably too late for you to have gotten it in your packets, but I did send all of you a press release from CalBike. There is a group of transportation, public safety, and public health organizations organized by CalBike have created California Independent Electric Mobility Council. And they are all, over the next, I think, 8 to 9 months, looking at developing updated guidance, policy recommendations to inform the state. And I really think that the state level is where legislation should be happening on this. I don't think that doing local ordinances here and there, frankly, are going to solve the problem, because we already have lots of rules about, I mean, has anybody ever been cited for violating the 3-foot law in passing a bicycle? I don't think so. But so many of the sort of the problems, besides, teens are going to teen and their individual behavior, is at the manufacturer and the sales point. Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Eris. Chris?
Chris Gunther with Bikeable Santa Rosa. Just want to agree with and reinforce a lot of this. And obviously, it's important to keep reinforcing the idea that e-bikes, and Councilmember McDonald, you said this, are really convenient for folks. And in particular, parents riding their kids to school, elders who are getting on bikes and getting around, and folks who obviously rely on them to commute long distances. It's also important to recognize that even though incidents are climbing, at least nationally, a lot of those still involve cars. And so some of the safety concerns around e-bikes, even separate from motorcycles and scooters, still have to do with the underlying problem around bike safety, around improving infrastructure, and the city should keep pursuing those goals. And then I definitely want to say that the education efforts are really valuable, not demonizing e-bikes. We certainly agree with that. But at the same time, I think, at least speaking for us, we are supportive of some additional restrictions to try to manage this problem, even including speed limits on certain bike paths. So we're open to those things. I also agree with Eris that working that out at the state and national level, and then getting recommendations down to local municipalities, is a really good approach. So thanks for this discussion.
Thank you, Chris. Is there anybody else? Seeing none, we will come back to the dais for final comments.
I think that Chris made a really great point of, do we need to have signs posted for speed limits for e-bikes in some of those bike lanes, specifically if they haven't been designed to go up to a certain speed limit, or a note that says, only these classes of bikes can be in these lanes for the safety of those who are riding a bike and walking in those. The other thing I wonder is, do we have an increase in incidents because we have an increase in people riding the e-bikes? So is there any correlation that shows we're going to have more incidents just because we have more people riding bikes or riding things like that? And so that's something to always kind of consider is, we want to make sure that kids are safe, or anyone's safe riding on e-bikes, but I would be for adding signage or making sure that the speed limits, even for e-bikes in those lanes, would be appropriate if we have the budget to add those through, or as we do designs, we bring those in as well.
Thank you, council member. Yeah, I think this is an interesting conversation. I know the chief and I first mentioned this maybe 3 months ago, 3.5 months ago, that we might want to address this. And it was the impetus for me mentioning it to him was going to pick up my son from aftercare at school, and probably a 12-year-old on a motorized bike just went zipping by and almost hit another kid. And starting to hear more stories about that and seeing stuff pop up online from our area, then Marin County, Petaluma, various issues. And I want to say that I don't think while we are classifying this as e-bike, I think there's an education component when it comes to e-bike. I think it's the misuse of electric motorcycles and the different classifications by individuals. It's the real problem here that I think needs to be addressed. So I'm all for education. Even having our police department during this outreach, possibly refer to the educational program that Sonoma County Bicycle Coalition has. I think there's a lot of probable ignorance by parents as to what the laws are and what their kids can and cannot do. Little Joey has one, so can I have one, Mom? Sure, okay. And then, they're bombing down a blacktop at a school at 30 miles an hour, right? So that's what I think we need to address in this. I would like to see the interesting pairing of transportation and public works and our police department address this in some way, shape, or form with the work as the work plan allows, with possible signage, education, whatever we need to do. So I would look forward to that. But I think there is a cross section of, yes, there's more adoption of e-bikes, but I think there's also more misuse of electric, whatever you want to call them, personal vehicles, personal transportation. So thank you very much for this presentation. I don't think this is the last we're going to hear of this issue. So if we can get ahead of the curve as much as we can, I think it would be great. So thank you very much. All right, with that, we will move on to item 6.4, response to recommendations. Actually, we're going to take a 5-minute recess because we only have 2 people and neither one of us can leave the dais. So we're going to take a 5-minute recess real quick and come back at 10 a.m. All right, thank you. We will come back in session, and Chief, please take it away with our OIR responses.
Thank you, Chair Krupke and Councilmember McDonald. I'm John Cregan, Chief of Police here in the city of Santa Rosa. And we're going to go through this summer in July, our independent police auditor, who's OIR group, and that's Steve Connolly and Mike Giannacco, came to City Council and presented their annual report from 2024. And they came up with 5 distinct recommendations for improvements that we could be making at the police department. Our independent auditor, Steve Connolly, is on Zoom today. So if there were any questions, he's going to be reviewing this and he'll be able to answer any questions, and he's available today. So they reviewed in the calendar year of 2024, 62 personnel investigations. Some were internally generated by the Santa Rosa Police Department. Others were through community complaints that came in to our professional standards team. And that's one thing it's really important to note, that we have a dedicated professional standards team of a sergeant and a lieutenant who are reviewing any complaints that we have come in. And that way we have really a more systematic approach and a more detailed approach with those investigations that we go through. And they literally have daily contact with Steve Connolly, our auditor, talking through any complaints that come in and reviewing those. Another important thing to note is this year, our independent police auditor is spending more than just the complaints and started looking a little bit more holistically, not only at our use of forces, even if it didn't result in a complaint, but our vehicle pursuits. And in 2024, we had 45 separate vehicle pursuits in our city, and he was able to look a little bit more holistically at those. We were able to, just over 2 years ago, upgrade to all of our 67 patrol cars, have the fleet cameras in them now. So there's 3 different cameras on those vehicles, both facing from the outside, but also of anyone who's a passenger in the vehicle. So it gives you a lot clearer view of what's really occurring in pursuits. And it has what I find very fascinating for me. It has, like, on the dashboard, the exact speedometer like that. So I can see exactly how fast they were going with the conditions that were present at the time. Now we'll go through the 5 different recommendations, and after us carefully reviewing those at the police department, some of the steps we're doing to address the recommendations. So recommendation number 1 is that, from our auditor's recommendation, is that we should continue to prioritize the enhancements to the standard use of force review process through the training and reinforcement of expectations for supervisors at all levels regarding thorough, holistic evaluations that are well documented, include confirmation of relevant follow-up. So for us, we have every single one of our uses of force are tracked with it. So, and one important note for that is, in 2024, we went to just under 118,000 calls for service. Out of those 118,000 calls for service, we made just over 6,500 arrests. So in that same time period in 2024, we used force 248 times. So when you put it into comparison, okay, 118,000 calls, 6,500 arrests, and just 248 uses of force, that's just 3.8% of our total calls for service and just 0.21% of our arrests. So such a fraction of those. Another thing that's important, even out of the 248, most of those are minor uses of force. And what the most large one, 194 of the 248, were takedowns with it. And that's like a leg sweep takedown, a hair pull takedown, a variety of takedowns that we do. Because what we're taught is, when you have a combative suspect, what's safest for the suspect and for the officers, get them down to the ground as quickly as possible. You can more contain them, as less injuries to both the officers and the suspects involved. Others are control holds, sometimes personal body weapons. In 2024, we saw no firearms fired. We saw no in custody deaths in the year 2024. So, but out of those 248, every single one of them is entered into a tracking system and is evaluated. So not only does the sergeant, who's the first line supervisor, review that use of force, looking at the body worn camera, the fleet camera, reading the report, the sergeant physically goes to the scene of those incidents and is able to talk to the suspect, evaluate the full circumstances. It's just then reviewed by a lieutenant, who's a mid-level manager, who does a second independent review of those. Any ones that have significant uses of force, or certainly with any concerns, go to the captain, like Captain Marinzik, who is just here, and they do a review. And if we were to find any issues, then it goes to our professional standards team for an internal investigation, and it may result in training or discipline based on those circumstances. But we agree with Steve Connolly's recommendation here about what are ways that we can enhance our review of this and make sure that some things that maybe aren't in policy but still could have been a better job are documented and we follow through. So one of the themes that you're going to be hearing about today is that we're upgrading to a new program called Axon Standards. And Axon Standards gives us the ability to more holistically dive deeper into some of the data that we have here. And also our cameras. Our cameras are all Axon cameras, our fleet cameras are Axon cameras, and it more seamlessly integrates those into the review process of all of our technology that we have. So those are one of the things that we're going to be talking throughout this presentation, how we're working with our independent police auditor, with our professional standards team to expand the questions in the review of our uses of force in our pursuits and our complaint process, and give me as the chief and our independent police auditor a little bit broader information. It's building out dashboards that we can track specific incidents that are occurring. I'll go to our next recommendation. So recommendation number 2 should take advantage of the impending redesign of the computerized force tracking to create specific guidelines that further standardize detailed reporting and analysis after use of force. So this is what I'm talking about here. We've already purchased the program. We're migrating all the data from our last program that we've had for years called IA Pro to this Axon Standards program. And our goal is to have that launched by the end of this year, that we'd be fully operational on the new Axon Standards with it. And one of the things that it really does that I'm interested in, I think our auditor is going to do as well, you're able to use analytics. So sometimes I'll get an email and say, hey, last week an officer drove by speeding, or an officer was rude to me, or I saw an officer treating someone unprofessionally on a bicycle stop. But it's very broad and they don't know the name of the officer. They don't have a description with it. So it makes it more difficult. Now with Axon Standards, we're able to put that limited information, and it actually uses computer analytics to go through our body-worn camera and our fleets and find these are incidents that match what you're talking about. And then we're able to, because we're recording thousands of videos throughout the week and through the month with our officers. So we're able to look at, and we can even put keywords of talking about if they were to say a phrase, and it'll bring that up. So it's making us that we can find more of some of these like vague complaints or broad complaints. We're able to dive deeper into that, find specifically the incident they're talking about, and make sure that we're able to analyze, is there credibility to this complaint, and are there things that we could have been doing better with it? And again, what we're doing is working to expand. We have drop down questions that the police sergeants and supervisors do about what the incident is, and we're working very closely with our independent auditor and our professional standards team to expand the list of those questions. So we're gathering even more broad data. And what our goal is to be able to transparently report back to our community what's occurring, and then to really make sure that we're using this data, some of the technology we have, to analyze what is our response to these calls and how can we be doing better. Recommendation number 3, SRPD should look for ways to maximize the influence of its training cadre in assessing and improving officer performance in high-risk operations. This is one I'm really proud of. I've seen, for been a police officer for just over 26 years, have seen over and over, generally in law enforcement, where you see some of the same mistakes made over and over and again, and we're not doing as good of a job as we can of addressing, like, these are common themes that we're seeing, whether it be simple mistakes, whether it be a lack of training, and then making changes in the organization to address that. So one of the ways that we're doing, not only is the use of force and the pursuit remodel we're doing, but we created these 2 dedicated training officers. And we didn't actually ask for new positions from council. We used our existing staff and reallocated and put 2 full-time training officers. And all they're doing is they're going through standardizing our training. They're looking at the themes that we're seeing, whether it be from complaints, whether it be in accidents, whether it be in use of force incidents, and saying, man, we've seen 6 times where someone's got injured in doing this takedown. We need to do some more training on this takedown to minimize the injuries, not only to suspects or to officers involved, or we're seeing an uptick in complaints in this area. So they're really looking for these trends and then building our training. So we have kind of more that upstream approach that we're seeing these are some problems, and we're building training to be able to minimize that. And even if we're seeing things across the nation, that we're getting ahead of it to make sure that problem doesn't show up here at the Santa Rosa Police Department. So really excited for that. It's also bringing consistency to our training. Last year in 2024, we did just over 24,000 hours of documented training with our officers. That's astounding. So this team is able to help make sure we're consistent with that each one of the trainings, we're meeting the standards that we want to be able to do, and that we continue to kind of raise the bar here for the Santa Rosa Police Department. Recommendation number 4, SRPD should consider ways to strengthen officer training in regard to the PIT maneuver and the use of spike strips. So we agree with that. PIT is an acronym for Pursuit Intervention Technique, and you may have seen that on TV where an officer comes up to the rear bumper of a vehicle and nudges it. It makes the rear wheels lose traction and it'll spin out. We do it in a controlled manner of under 30 miles an hour, and we're able to do it safely in these pursuits. But our officers are using it. But what our independent police auditor talked about is we ought to be doing more training on that, and was puzzled as why we're sending officers all the way to Fresno to receive the PIT training with it. I strongly agree with him on this issue. This comes down to funding with it, that we don't have the ability to do our own internal PIT training here. Our training fund has been stagnant now for almost 8 years at the same amount. In those 8 years, costs for travel, plane tickets, training, food, everything has gone up. So with 24,000 hours of training, we're not able to do that. We're estimating that a PIT program, not only we have to have specific PIT trained cars that have like bumpers on the side of them with it. We've worked closely with our fleet program with maintaining it. It would be roughly $50,000 a year for us to be able to do internal PIT training with it. So that's something that we're going to continue to work with. Some of the budget complexities that we're facing right now. We'll continue to push that, but I'm not sure where it falls on the list of priorities, but it's certainly something that we agree with our auditor with. In the meantime, we're going to continue sending officers for they just go one time in their career to the PIT training. It's a one-day course in Fresno. We don't have the ability to do ongoing training with that, but we'll work toward finding ways. We've reached out to other agencies in the area who have some PIT trainings. They weren't willing to let us join their PIT programs just because of the cost that it does to their damage to the vehicles. So we don't really have any other options. Also the spike strips, I agree with this. We have some spike strips that we purchased over 20 years ago that are a little bit more outdated. So we're looking at the cost of some more updated spike strips that can be used more safely and more effectively with it. I was actually just meeting with my training team just earlier this week, and they have some demo products that we're looking at. So we're going to be testing those, and that's what our training officers were able to do. And we'll be looking for some funding for that and looking for ways that we can absorb that in our current budget that we have. So progress is on way on the PIT training with it, but really right now what it holds us down to is our training funds. Recommendation number 5, SRPD should continue to prioritize the comprehensive review of vehicle pursuits incidents and should extend the willingness to address performance that deviates from policy and expectations with formal discipline when warranted. For this, we're not afraid to hold people accountable for these pursuits, and we actually did initiate several proactive internal investigations and held officers accountable for pursuits this year. And most of this is what you see is officers that are driving faster than the conditions allow with it. So obviously the suspect is trying to go as fast as they can. At some point, we have to weigh like, okay, is this worth the risk of what we're chasing this person for at this point with it? Sergeants are constantly evaluating. We cancel pursuits. Last year, we were just over 30% of our pursuits. The sergeant or the officer themselves self-canceled the pursuit, just saying, all right, based on the circumstances. So if it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and we're going nearby a school, it has to be a pretty grave circumstance for us to continue a pursuit. Fortunately for us, most of our pursuits occur in the nighttime and early morning hours, often are associated with impaired drivers who are driving, trying to flee from us. But that's certainly something, and this is what we're expanding with the new Axon standard system, really incorporating our Axon fleet system that we can look exactly at what the speed is, what are the conditions, and evaluate this. So we're going to continue to work with our auditor to carefully analyze these and make sure if we have officers who aren't meeting our expectations are held accountable, but really using our training team to make sure that we're doing an intensive training, that we're making sure our officers understand how to be able to safely navigate pursuits. And it's a balancing act. We want to hold people accountable who are fleeing, who may be involved. And we've had several of our cannabis dispensaries that have been burglarized in the nights, and those almost all have resulted in pursuits when we found the vehicle fleeing the area. So we want to balance and be able to make sure not have crime and safety issues in Santa Rosa, but make sure that we can safely manage these pursuits throughout our city. So those are briefly going through the 5 recommendations. Each one of them, I agree with the independent police auditor's recommendations, and we're holistically making steps to make sure that we have those improvements with it. We've also worked with our city manager to make sure that each one of our complaints that are coming in, we have a complaint dashboard, not only on the city manager's website, but also on the police department's website, that our community can go to be able to see in live time as we go throughout the year complaints that are coming into the Santa Rosa Police Department. Our independent police auditor has a page on our website as well where you can reach out directly to our independent police auditor through phone or email. And then we continue to have that, like I've talked about, almost daily contact with our auditors, talking about incidents. And one thing that really sets the Santa Rosa Police Department apart is our thorough review of our access of our auditor, that our auditor gets the complaint is immediately upon our receipt of it, is able to review the body worn camera footage, the fleet cameras. And what really sets us apart is our auditor is a part of investigation. So we just did an interview yesterday with an officer, and our auditor was there. Part of the interview, was able to directly ask the officer questions. And that's something that lets the auditor really lift up the hood, look a little bit more deeply at the incidents, and is able to provide me good recommendations when I get the ultimate recommendation at the end of the day with it. And I always meet with the auditor if there's any type of confusion or discrepancy on the discipline that we're going to impose. So those are the 5 recommendations. Love to take any questions, and our auditor will be here to answer any questions if we need to as well.
Thank you, Chief. Questions?
Thank you, Chief. And I want to congratulate you and your department on 24,000 hours of training and their commitment to always improving what they're doing, which I think is exemplary already. One of the things that you mentioned was this constant feedback on the cameras. Do the cameras automatically go on as soon as the car starts, or is it when they go into pursuit? And same with their body worn cameras. How does that work, and when is that triggered?
So the cameras, when they're on, are always recording, but we have to turn something to activate. So we have a series of things. So the officers can manually activate their cameras, both on their car or on their body worn camera. But we have on the car, like when you turn the lights on, then they automatically go on. We also have a program, Axon Signal, where it builds like a perimeter around a call. So when you drive into that area, it automatically activates your camera. So actually, just this week, I was driving down 4th Street in the morning. An officer had made a traffic stop, and I just drove by and it turned on my body worn camera as I drove by with it. So that's what it does with it too. And that's where because what we saw sometimes during the stress of these incidents, you're racing to get out of your car, you're jumping out of your car, maybe someone who fled from a vehicle, and then they're not activating the cameras during the stress. So we're trying to take kind of the user error out of that. So all pursuits are going to have the body worn, or it's going to have the fleet camera automatically on, because the second your lights go on, they automatically go on with it too. And then what we're working with the body worn cameras is through that like perimeter with it. But what we've seen is our officers so heavily rely on the body worn cameras that they've gotten to really just, it's like second nature to them now. And what we're really trying to encourage is like, when you're driving to the call, turn on the camera then with it. And we might get a minute of a steering wheel, record it, but I'd rather that. So then the second they get out of the car, it's already on and we're able to capture that. And it has a 30-second buffer at all times. So when you activate your camera, it goes back 30 seconds in the video, and it provides just video, no audio with it for that 30-second buffer time. And that's to help sometimes that you may just be sitting there having coffee and someone comes up and confronts an officer. We want to get the full picture of what occurred. So that's why it's going back 30 seconds.
Thank you. And then you talked about the PIT training. I think that's what it was, where they where we need new equipment for that as well. But have we thought about combining our efforts with the other jurisdictions around us, like the sheriff's department or the other police departments that are local, to see if there would be a shared cost to bringing the training local?
Yeah, we did. So we met, the sheriff's department does have a pit. So we met with them and stuff, but unfortunately they weren't willing to join pit services with us. And they just didn't want to absorb the training costs with it. Or really they were more worried about that it does more wear and tear to their vehicles with it. They're the only ones who has a dedicated pit program here in Sonoma County. We also reached out to the Sonoma County Police Academy to see if that through the Santa Rosa Junior College, and they were the same. Like it's not worth the cost to them to take it on, and they have so many other programs. So really our option, we used to have a pit program. We cut it years ago just to the cost with it. So our option is to take 4 retired patrol vehicles that are coming off with that like that. They put these metal guardrails on the side of them. It costs $2,500 per guardrail. Our fleet team says to put those on with it. And then the biggest thing is just the ongoing cost of keeping those, of doing the repairs. You got to replace the tires at a much higher rate because they're spinning around constantly with it. So they estimated that it would cost us about $50,000 to get this program off the ground with it and to be able to continue it forward. So it's something that we'll continue to monitor because I think it is an important way to safely end pursuits earlier with it. And then I'll continue the conversations with the others in the region and to see, and maybe outside of the sheriff's department, maybe there's other jurisdictions of Roner Park and Petaluma that we could work to kind of come in with them on one with it. And so we haven't engaged them yet because they don't have programs, but maybe it's a way that they would work with us and we could share some of the costs of the pit cars here. So that's something that we'll continue to work for.
Thank you.
Thanks for that presentation, Chief. For the pit training, do you need an EVOC course for that, or can that be done in a number of ways?
We mainly do it when we did it here locally. We were able to rent out some of the unused runways out at the Sonoma County Airport, and that's where the Sheriff's Department does there as well. And that's where we do our EVOC training with it now. So that's the most effective way to do it, and it's even better if you can like hose down like the runway, so then it makes not as much damage to the cars if there's more not as much friction on the roadway. So that's what we're primarily doing is we have a contract with Sonoma County Airport and use some of their unused runways area that we can safely do our pit training and EVOC training.
Okay. And then back to the cameras. It's our practice that if they go off for any reason, that needs to be logged, right? So like you're incidental, like you're coming on, you have to log why your body worn camera came on.
Yeah, so if it comes on, then you have to categorize it with it. So for us, the second you're required, if you're in uniform, you have to have the body worn camera on. If you're a detective, like going out and serving a search warrant with it too. So if we know of any call that you're on where it didn't get recorded with the body worn camera, then we would investigate that, and that would be a complaint with us to it. And then we're able to track. So any of the uses of force, any of these things with it, we're able to track if like an officer were to turn off the camera mid-interview or mid-incident with it, then that would not be meeting our policy.
Right, but I guess the policy is so stringent that like even you driving down 4th Street going to work and yours accidentally came on because you were within that perimeter, you still have to log that. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes. So yes, I was thankful for the officer as I drove by that. So when I come in, I have to go in and categorize that video with it like that. And we can do it like on an app on the phone. The officers can categorize, and you have to put in that one. Then I put that, hey, I didn't stop for the traffic stop. So I am able to categorize like, hey, this is not a video that's of any evidence or value. But you put, if you do a traffic stop or a case number, you put the incident number, the crime report number, and then they're tracked, whether it's a misdemeanor or felony. And then we have a retention with, I believe, misdemeanors are 3 years, felonies are 5 years. And if it's a pending investigation, it's until the investigation is over with it too. So all those are categorized with it. And then that's what's super helpful for us, that even years down the road, if a complaint were to come in, or if we start investigating any officer, and we can start looking at a pattern of behavior. And that's where this new Axon Standards program is going to be so helpful, that we can start looking for like, hey, have there been incidents where this was said or this behavior? And we can use the analytical tools of Axon Standards to be able to dissect more of these calls.
Great, thank you. That's all of my questions for right now. So we'll go to public comment. There is no public comment, there is no public, so we'll close public comment and bring it back. Do you have any final comments?
So Chief, just going back to the cameras, when you were and I want to congratulate you on your trunk or treat last
yeah.
night. It was a huge success. I ran by the fairgrounds, that's building, pardon me, and it was great. But so if you're just in that type of situation with all of those officers, do they have their cameras on the whole time?
They don't. So they're on like but they're in that buffer mode. So they're not recording
Okay.
with it, but they're all going to be on and then the buffer mode. But our policy says that if it's like a community event or just like having like coffee and meeting a community member, that your body worn camera's on, it's not on actually recording. It's just in that buffer. But if something would have broke out, a fight would have broke out, or some tragic incident would have occurred, they would have all been able to hit their camera. They would have turned on. It would have been buffering back 30 seconds, and they would have been able to record
I see.
what was occurring.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Chief. I think it's important to note that when you're looking at these OIR recommendations, all 5 of these, they seem to be proactive process and training, that they're not reactive to any sort of singular incident that happened that, or a practice that we have that needs to change. But it's more, hey, you should continue to do this going forward, or hey, you should look into doing this. And it's process and training. It's not, what do you want to say? What do you want to call it? Basically, reactive to some sort of major incident that we were found at fault to be doing anything wrong. It is, you're doing great, maybe consider doing this. And I think that speaks to our level of professionalism and training within the police department. I feel bad for our OIR representative that's sitting on Zoom right now, because these are so, while important, they're so lesser of severity that I don't really have any questions for them. So I appreciate them joining, but great job by the police department, and great job by your command staff and training staff to have a police department that has 5 process and training recommendations to consider. So great job. Thank you.
Thank you. We're really proud of that. And ultimately, it's the men and women who are out there every night and day making these stressful decisions out in the field, who are just doing incredible work. So I'm really proud of them. And it's been a good partnership with OIR that they're really helping. And as they said at the council presentation, they're right at this point, it's like fine tuning things. And that's where I like that. We're fine tuning to really make some of these process improvements to make sure that we're even better prepared for this next year. But thank you very much.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So with that, we will move on to item 7. There are no matters held in committee, and 8 to department reports. Chief, please.
Thank you. So we'll turn it over, if we can bring this next slide up with it. And we're going to do a brief update on some of our problem-oriented policing with it that we're able to address. And this is something that we've really been working to educate our community on more. So we're divided into 9 separate police beats, not to be confused with the council districts with it. So 9 separate police beats. You can go to our Santa Rosa Police Department website under the About Us, and then you can bring down, it has a beat map, and then you can also enter your address, and it'll tell you exactly what beat you're in within the city. With it, we're in beat 9 here right now in City Hall. So it's important, but what I really like to be able to make sure educate people on is when you bring it down. So this is the beat map right here showing the different beats across the city and how we kind of are geographically. But each one of these beats has a dedicated sergeant, that's the first line supervisor, lieutenant, the mid-level manager, and 9 patrol officers that are assigned to each one of those beats. And if you go to our website under the About Us, it'll tell you your sergeant, your lieutenant, and all 9 of your officers. And it'll give their name, their email address. You can email them directly with it. And what we're trying to do is better connect our community over things that aren't like emergencies that are occurring, but like problems of like, hey, even the e-bikes is a good example of, hey, we're seeing a bit uptick in e-bike issues around Rincon Valley Community Park with it. That's an area like that. And then the community members can email their beat lieutenant and sergeant and saying, hey, this is an issue we're having, or whether it be related to any other type of problem in our city. And we're really trying to focus on the officers communicating with each other, coming up to address some of the issues in each one of those beats, and hopefully address some of our community concerns with it. Also, another thing that we really want to encourage people is we're putting out information, whether it be about some things like with the e-bikes that we talked about, other community issues on Civic Ready. And Civic Ready is our messaging platform, not only for significance, but also day-to-day activities, whether it be the trunk or treat event that we had last night or other things. So I encourage people to go to our website. You can just Google Santa Rosa Civic Ready, or you can go to the city or police department website, and we all have links to be able to sign up for Civic Ready. And these are some of the things we're trying to do culturally in the department about educate our community more about the 9 beats, have our officers get out of the car, be doing more foot patrols, whether it be downtown, whether it be in parks, community spaces, is to be out there connecting with our community and more diving deeper into addressing some of the community problems that may be popping up. With it. The other thing too, you can just, if you have a general question about the police department, you can email at srpdinfo@srcity.org. Those will go to our team, and they'll allocate them to the team that's most appropriate based if it's a abandoned vehicle complaint or a graffiti complaint, whatever it may be. Another greatly underutilized tool that we have in the city is the My Santa Rosa app. So I love to show people the My Santa Rosa app, and you can put in, it'll give you a category, whether you're reporting abandoned vehicle, whether you're reporting a dead deer on the side of the road, whatever it is, and it'll go to the appropriate department. And we work to quickly be able to not only respond back to you in the My Santa Rosa app, but to send the appropriate city staff out there. And I've used the My Santa Rosa app myself several times to report issues in my neighborhood and have seen seamless contact by our city departments getting out there and doing it. And at the end of the day, if you feel like you're not getting the information you need or the resources you need, you can always email me directly at jcregan@srcity.org, and I'll make sure that we give you the resources that you need. So just wanted to quickly kind of talk about our 9-beat structure, how you can understand of connecting with the sergeant and lieutenant in that beat, how we're working as an organization to really start diving deeper into the little micro issues that in each one of these 9 beats and start being able to show some measurable improvements. And also understanding this problem-oriented policing philosophy is that we're not going to solve it necessarily always with the police department, but partnering with whether it be our fire department, transportation and public works, code enforcement, whatever it is, and using all of the resources. The violence prevention partnership has been a game changer for us, using all these different departments to be able to address some of the issues that may be occurring in your beat. But we just need to know about the issue. So reach out to us, let me know about it, and we'll make sure that we address it. And that was just a quick update on that. Any questions?
Thanks, Chief. Any questions? No, just another plug for the My Santa Rosa app. It is fantastic. All right, hold on. We'll go to public comment. No public. Come back. Comments. The My Santa Rosa app, anecdotally, you can see where people have used it on social media, and no matter which department it is, the police department, obviously great, but also transportation, public works, whatever it might be, there is a very quick turnaround, and there's even the ability to track where your complaint or communication is in the process. But I do appreciate this with the renewed focus on problem-oriented policing and the outreach, the various With a Cop programs, whether it be coffee, tacos, fruta, whatever it might be, are always a success. So thank you. Please continue to do that. And with that, we will move on to the fire department.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Chief Westrope.
Good morning again, Council Member Okrepke and McDonald. Scott Westrope, Fire Chief of the City of Santa Rosa. I'm going to provide a brief update on the fire department here. Hopefully get through this quick because I know I'm between you and your regular jobs. So I kind of always run the same theme here, but in staffing updates, what I want to highlight here and what I've changed a little bit to highlight here is showing how many employees that we have that live outside of the general fund. And it's something that we're proud of, that we've gone out and found other funding sources to increase staffing or to maintain staffing throughout the department. So we have 174 FTE total in position control, 12 are safer employees. And we're working with a consultant to build a revenue stream project that we can bring forward to hopefully pay for those employees in perpetuity. We have 14 employees currently in Measure H. The 6 that we talked about earlier for the rescue have been deferred till next fiscal year, and they have 10.25 positions in PSAP. So we've really tried to not impact the general fund yet increase service, and that's how we've done it. Currently in operations, we have an academy of 7 firefighter paramedics. They're due to graduate mid-December. They're all doing very well. And then throughout the course of Measure H and our retirements and things like that, we're working on backfill and promotions, and our goal is to be at constant staffing by the end of the fiscal year. In response, we have 2 vacant positions that are currently being held. In fire prevention, we already talked about the movement of the fire inspectors with Measure H and the limited term fire inspectors. And then we have 1 vacant community outreach specialist position. In administration, we're at full staffing. And one of the things I wanted to highlight too, based on where we came from out of this year's general fund budget and the reductions we had to make in the fire department, is we have a new organizational chart that's available online. I didn't put it into the slide deck, but there is a new org chart there that shows the restructuring that had to occur with the loss of a deputy chief, the loss of an admin secretary, and the loss of a deputy emergency manager. And with that as well, we've been working with all of our partners throughout the city on an emergency management redundancy, and especially in the alert and warning programs, some redundancy on how we can back up emergency manager Bregman should the need arise. So making sure that we have that redundancy built into place. Some exciting news is on fire stations. As you likely know, Fire Station 5 in Fountain Grove, which we lost in the Tubbs fire, is slated to open any time now, but we're having the grand opening on November 15th. So we're really excited to finally return service into a full-time fire station in Fountain Grove in the next couple weeks. On the day before that, on Friday, we're having the official groundbreaking for Fire Station 8 in Roseland. We're expecting that station to be completed in June of 2027. If you've driven by there recently, you can see there's construction fencing up. It's graded off. All the buildings are gone. So there's work already started on that parcel. But we're excited to have a new station in Roseland here in the next couple years. We talked about Station 9 in the Measure H presentation, so I'm not going to repeat that. And the other thing we did last year, and it kind of slid through under the CIP accounts in the budget, is we moved where infrastructure projects are funded by CFF funds. And one of the things we did was we closed a couple accounts, particularly related to Station 5 and Station 8, but we opened one for Fire Station 11. So Fire Station 11 is on Lewis Road, across from Safeway in the Junior College District. They've been in a temporary fire station since 2007. It's a triple wide mobile home. It was supposed to be there for 5 years, and here we are 18 years. So the good news with that is, and my sell to the city manager and assistant city manager and TPW director is, it's the easy button with very heavy air quotes, because we own it. It's CEQA. We have general concept plans for a full-time fire station there. So we started putting money into that account. Once we show that it has a consistent revenue stream, then we can go and look for debt service and potentially build that station here not too far off. So we're starting to move money into there so we can get them out of that mobile home that they're in now. And then on the fleet side of things, I think I've said this to you for probably the better part of a year, but we have 5 Type 1 engines, which you see there on the right, on order. They are on the assembly line now, and they should be completed in March of this year. 4 out of the general fund fleet replacement program, and 1 is out of PSAP to replace the old PSAP engine. And then the 2 Type 6 engines that we bought, that was the end of the WU 2.0 PG&E settlement fund dollars, are in service. They were in service for the end of the fire season, but you see them there on the left. So it's a huge addition to our fleet. And the last bit of exciting news here is that our second K9, Onyx, he and his handler, Ben Bask, successfully graduated last weekend from the NICST First Response K9 Training Program. So Ben and Onyx are now officially part of our behavioral health K9 program, along with Maverick. So Onyx is the polar opposite of Maverick. Maverick is very methodical and slow and mellow, and Onyx is not. So you kind of get both sides of the fence there, but congratulations to Ben and Onyx. We're really excited to have redundancy in the K9 behavioral health program. Captain Rickert was promoted to battalion chief, so we're fortunate to have Maverick in our office every day for the time being. And then Onyx will be stationed with Engineer Bask and be available. So just thought I'd end that on a high note. Everybody likes the puppy program, so we will get them to a meeting here soon to where you can all meet Onyx. And with that, any questions or comments you might have?
Any questions?
Thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question around our staffing size. So we have 174 full-time employees. For a city our size that has undergone some really horrific fires, and with the WUI maps that are just being withdrawn, do you have some data behind how many we should have on staff to make sure that we're covered as far as the city goes?
We do have some data. It's about 6 years outdated. We're actually in the process right now of completing a new deployment analysis and community risk reduction plan, which will have new data, and we'll bring that to likely this committee first when it's completed. But we just sent off the final draft of it. But to kind of put it in perspective, I guess is the best way to do it. Is there are national standards for that, but if you look at the fact that In 2007, which was the last time prior to Engine 9 that we added a new engine company, we were running about 18,000 calls a year. Last year, we ran over 30,000 calls a year, and we hadn't added new resources. So we're definitely on the way to it. With the addition of the squads through SAFER and the addition of Engine 9, we're on our way there. But those recommendations were from about 10 years ago, so we're just kind of catching up. So we certainly need more resources on the streets. It's just a fine balance of, as you very well know, the budget and financial constraints. But we will bring back some new data-driven analysis here in the next couple months.
Thank you. And I appreciate staff doing the reorg so that we don't see the impact on the community as far as that goes. So I appreciate everybody updating and taking on more with fewer people. And so thanks to the entire team. I had a question about Station 11. You mentioned that that will potentially start to become a permanent building. Is it going to be in the same location? So will it just be a tear down and rebuild, or what's the plan for that? If I
So-
recall, it's one of our busiest stations. for
It
calls.
is. It is.
Okay.
It's usually the top one or two of our busiest stations. So going back to when Measure O passed in 2004, and that is a Measure O station, the plan was they didn't have enough funding to build a station. So the design of the whole project that's now almost 20 years old was to put the temporary station there with the permanent engine bay and then build a station on the front of that property. So it's all part of the general project and planning of that property. So it'll go on the same property. It will not be a tear down. It will be building the fire station while the current station is in service. And then they'll remove the temporary structure from the rear of the property. So it's all part of the plan. It's just outdated and we'll have to update things, but it'll be in the same location on the same piece of property and it'll remain in service the entire time.
Great, thank you.
Just a couple of questions from me. Where are the Type 6 engines stationed out of?
We move things around. And so one Type 6 is at Station 4 on Uloop Avenue, so it really covers the Annandale area. The other is at Station 11, which is the Lewis Road station, and then we move the Type 3s around to different locations. So for the most part, we have a wildland engine at almost every one of our stations, particularly focusing on the wildland interface areas between the Type 3s and Type 6s.
Great, thank you very much. And then we'll go, I have no more questions. I'll just have some final comments. We'll go to public comment. There's no public. We'll come back. Final comments.
I love the K9 program that you are bringing to the fire department as well. I think they do bring a calming presence, even if Onyx is a little bit crazier. It's sort of like children. You have one, they're very calm, they're very good, and then you have a second one, and it's different. So, but I appreciate that bringing the good news to us, and I love that program. And if the fire department finds it to be really helpful, encourage you to continue it and add more canines if we can.
Thank you. And just a side note to that is it's a plug that really there's not a major impact to the general fund there. That's all been funded through the Santa Rosa Fire Foundation. So really appreciative of that, that they pay for the training, they pay for the ongoing costs and care of the animals. So it's been great, and we've done it at very little cost to the city.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, huge shout out to the Santa Rosa Fire Foundation. Their board members are fantastic individuals.
Shameless plugs.
Shameless plugs. What station are Ben and Onyx stationed out of?
It's a great question. I'm
Thank
not
you.
sure.
All right.
He was stationed at Station 5, but there's so much movement, I can't keep track.
Fair
of
enough.
everybody.
What I would say is, yeah, do make sure that, if you want your funding to stay intact, that you get the mayor and Onyx together in post haste. I do also think that you missed a great opportunity to rename Onyx Goose. I mean, having Maverick and Goose would have been phenomenal. But that's just my personal opinion.
They come named, so we don't have much of a choice.
People change names all the time.
That's true.
Anyways, easy. Yeah, this is great. I appreciate the update. The one thing I do want to touch on is the fleet. You and I spoke about this last week, that our fleet is due for upgrades and we've wanted to upgrade for a while now, but can you address what the issue is with upgrading as quickly as we would like to?
Yeah, absolutely. So fleet's become a big issue, and it's not just in Santa Rosa. It's not in the state of California. It's a national problem. So the major manufacturers of fire engines, which there aren't a lot of, have been largely consolidated by private equity. And so what we've seen is a significant and drastic shift in the cost of fire apparatus as well as the delivery time and apparatus. For instance, the fire engines that we just received that we ordered in fiscal year 20, we purchased for $850,000. That same fire engine now is 1.2 million. The ladder truck that we ordered 2 years ago, or that we received 2 years ago, was $1.25 million. The one that's currently on order is twice that cost and has a 4-year delivery time. So we're seeing the prices increase drastically, and at the same time, the delivery time is 4 to 5 years, where we typically it would be about a year. So we started talking about this with our state and federal lobbying teams a while ago, and it's really reached the national level where there's been some Congress oversight put in place, and there's some Congress studies going on. International Association of Fire Chiefs is deeply involved to try to do some investigation, put some regulations on these companies that are just driving the costs through the roof. And the concurrent issue is that what we're seeing in fire engines is, just like anything, it's the aluminum's failing, the steel's failing. We're seeing the electrical components where, when I started, it was all levers and knobs, and now it's all electronics. If a motherboard goes out, the engine's done. So trying to regulate it tighter at a federal level will help us out. It's just going to be a long time to get there. And at the same time, our fire engines are not holding up like they used to. So fortunately, it started out as a Santa Rosa, we thought it was a Santa Rosa issue. And when we brought it to the federal lobbying team, they hadn't heard of it. When they were here 2 weeks ago, they brought documentation that it's at the congressional level. So it's a national problem that we're willing to combat and willing to take on, and we're working with our federal lobbying team on getting there. So appreciate the question, and it's a really trying time for the fire service as far as fleet goes.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. And with that, we'll move on from this item, and that moves us to item 9, adjournment, and we will adjourn at 10:50.